I'm Karen Hilsbeck, President of the CityClub's Board of Directors, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today. As you well know, CityClub is a trusted place of civic conversation, inspiration, and action. Our programs strengthen the civic health of our region, and we thank you for being here. The video that you just saw is an example of one of our own trailblazing programs, Civic Boot Camp. We just started this program this last year. It's a lot of fun, fast-paced, day-long program that showcases the region's history, provides access to leaders, and links participants with Seattle's civic life. Please consult your program, CityClub staff, or seattlecityclub.org for more information. Today we are here to celebrate a local civic trailblazer, to learn about national initiative to strengthen our democracy, and to support the work that CityClub does every day to engage 47,000 Washingtonians with each other and their communities. Before we begin our program, I would like to thank today's sponsors, our event sponsors, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Boeing Company. If you join me in a round of applause. Premier Table sponsors Primera, Schwabe Williams Wyatt, the Westin Seattle, Washington State University, and the Women's Funding Alliance. And thank you also to our other table sponsors, table hosts, fundraising committee, our volunteers, and I want to do a special shout out to our CityClub staff. Diane, Douglas, and team, you are phenomenal, and we are grateful for your leadership. And last but certainly not least, our founders. We have many who are with us today, sitting here at the front table. If you just please raise your hand, get a little, thank you. So today I have the pleasure of presenting CityClub's third annual Civic Leadership Award named after Nancy Nordhoff, one of our CityClub's 8 founders, who epitomizes community building through vision, leadership, generosity, and collaboration. I'm sure that most of the people in the room know Nancy or know of Nancy's work. Even if you don't, I know you've been touched by Nancy's leadership in our community. You being here today is evidence of that. CityClub's Nancy Nordhoff Civic Leadership Award is given annually to an individual from the Pacific Northwest who inspires others to civic action for the common good. The award recognizes leaders whose work is aligned with CityClub's civic mission and who share some of the skills and traits exemplified by Nancy Nordhoff. I'd like to thank and gratefully acknowledge the leadership of the 2014 Nancy Nordhoff Civic Leadership Award Selection Committee, Leonard Garfield, Grace Nordhoff, and Norm Rice. If you please give them a round of applause. Martha, det är en stor ära att presentera dig med denna prisen. Du är en inspiration och en av våra regioner kämpar. Gratulerar. Du förtjänar den ros och anerkännelse. Glädje över dig. For those of you who know Martha, you know well that she would much rather be outside than in. She would certainly rather be shining the spotlight than standing in the center of it. And yet, Martha, here you are. Thank you for accommodating us today. To begin our award presentation, we have a video from Senator Patty Murray, who couldn't be here today, but very much wanted to extend her congratulations and welcome.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you today. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to Seattle CityClub's annual luncheon. I'd like to start off by thanking CityClub for their great work strengthening the civic health of our region by informing, inspiring, and engaging citizens to action. Thank you all for the work you do and for all you'll continue to do. Today, we honor someone who represents all that can be accomplished through civic engagement, and whether it's through her work on environmental issues, social justice, or the arts, she works tirelessly on behalf of the Pacific Northwest. A heartfelt congratulations to my friend Martha Kongsgaard on winning the Nancy Nordhoff Civic Leadership Award for her truly inspirational work over the years. I've known Martha for years, and she's been a great partner as we work for a better Washington State. It's been a pleasure working with Martha throughout that time, and especially in her current role as chair of the Puget Sound Partnership Leadership Council. She has been a leader in Washington's environmental community for over 25 years. And while she's probably best known for her environmental work and dedication to cleaning up and protecting Puget Sound and the region's waterways, Martha has also had her hand in a wide variety of efforts to better our state and our region. Her foundation supports local entities in the arts, the environment, and human rights and civic development, and benefits local and regional nonprofits ranging from Humanities Washington to the Seattle Aquarium to public radio stations. She is making a real difference, and I know she'll continue to do so for years to come. So congratulations, Martha, on this well-deserved honor. And again, thank you to all of you there for your work for Washington State. I'm proud to be your partner in the U.S. Senate. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your event.
A little while ago, I got to meet with Martha to visit and just get to know her a bit. When I asked her about herself, she began with her maternal grandfather, who, by way of Missouri, established their family of Napa roots. She spoke of her father, whose people came from the west side of Norway and settled in Everett, establishing her Northwest roots. She described her unflappable, Republican, Stanford-educated lawyer mother and Democratic, kind, didn't-know-a-stranger, Cal and Stanford-educated judge father. She spoke of her siblings, her husband, her kids, her love of the outdoors, particularly the mountains, our region and what it will and can be like for generations to come. On the one hand, that's typical of Norwegian heritage, to link so strongly to your past and be committed to the common good. And on the other, it's also a shared circular worldview of the indigenous peoples Martha has been partnering with tirelessly to ensure our environment is cared for and that it is here for generations to come. This worldview says that those living now have a duty to protect the values from the past in planning for the future in a modern world. What I have come to understand is that with Martha, first, she's very much a unique blend of her parents. And second, that what you see is what you get. She is present for you and for anyone she is representing. She is engaging. She is witty and smart. She is humble and strong, honest and blunt, reserved yet gregarious, confidently generous. She is a lawyer, an activist, committed to social and environmental justice, an artist, a conservationist, a philanthropist, a loving wife and mother, a treasured friend and servant to many. Whether you agree with her politics or cause, CityClub celebrates Martha today because she takes risks to catalyze change. She has turned her vision and the vision of her community into action by showing up, relentlessly, persistently, graciously showing up. Because she and Peter have invested in people and ideas that have power and impact. Arts West, Arcade, the Seattle Symphony, Seattle Public Library, Terrazin Music Memorial Project, Confluence Project, Building Changes, Solid Ground, Bailey Boucher House, Seattle Arts and Lectures, CityClub, Islandwood, Rails to Trails Conservancy, Methow Conservancy, Cascade Land Conservancy, Audubon, Washington, Earth Justice, Forest Ethics, Forterra, Sierra Club. I haven't even scratched the surface. She models inclusiveness and fosters collaboration through her profound desire to do what she believes is right for the common good, as well as with her board service and community involvement, including the Puget Sound Partnership, Bullitt Foundation, University of Washington, and the Ruckelshaus Center, to name a few. We honor Martha because she engages, challenges, and empowers others to share their wealth, be it through Philanthropy Northwest, Washington Women's Foundation, or on her own foundation. Every gift matters. Because she rolls up her sleeves, leads others by examples, and continues to mentor generations next to do the same. Because she encourages and enriches community dialogue and thoughtful civil discourse. Because she acts with integrity, humility, passion, and courage. We honor Martha today because she is generous of spirit, of time, talent, and of money. And because she weathers the ups and downs with determination and commitment. Because for Martha, leadership is always taking the long view. When I asked Martha why she is so involved and committed to the issues and people she cares about, she quoted Gro Harlem Brundtland, former Prime Minister of Norway and Director of the UN World Health Organization. She said very simply, it's a decision. It's a decision to care. It's a decision to learn. It's a decision to engage. It is a decision to act. It is a decision to give. Martha made the decision because being engaged in this community matters to her. And Martha, we are profoundly grateful. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the 2014 Nancy Nordhoff Leadership Award recipient and Civic Trailblazer, Martha Kongsgaard.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. High on the stage stood a Nordhoff winner, lady, oh, lady, hoo, trying not to toss up last night's dinner, lady, oh, lo. Wow, I just had to get that out of the way. Tusen hjertelig takk du, Karen. Det var så voldsomt. Tusen takk for det. And thank you, everyone who's here. I'm just floored and honored and so not used to being in the spotlight like this. I like to have it on my own terms, but I'm so flabbergasted to be here and humbled. They say this is a lifetime. It's not a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I hope it's not. I'm pushing 60, but I know Nancy didn't get her really start crank until she was about 55, so I've got a lot more work to do, God willing. When Diane told me that I'd been chosen for this award, she asked me who I wanted to invite, and I said, oh my gosh, you so do not understand. Are you kidding me? No one. So thank you all, friends and colleagues and fellow board members and my dear, dear inner circle pals from long ago, from law school and beyond. Thank you for being here. I do get it. This is a fundraiser. And so when Diane asked me that, my husband just took over and invited most of you, I think. But at this point, let me thank our host, CityClub, and this rich and uniquely American non-governmental universe that it lives in and shapes, that force for good, that sector we call America's passing lane, the civic heart of prosperity. This place, as you'll hear in the conversation between Professor Domke and Dean Kramer, creates room for public and civic conversation, inspiration and action, strengthening the civic health of our region. It's clear that without a space like this and an insistence on fundamental public engagement in this third sector that we all, and you know we all, take it for granted, this ability, this right to have an opinion, to debate, especially in this super nice Northwest part of the country, to rail, to prosper, to differ, our community is the weaker. So let me encourage you all while I'm at it to dig deeply here today. This is your chance to publicly iterate your deeply held personal beliefs about our relationship to one another, about an ethic and understanding about what happens to you happens to me in the end. We have to preserve this safe but provocative central civic meeting place with more than a sentimental bake sale or a mere lunch with an honoree that can supply. There's no leadership beyond ourselves. I think we all know that, so let's give with seriousness and purpose before lunch is out, and I'm not asking you to pass around the envelopes because that's not really my job. So back to me. Being at a loss for words, as most of you know, that would be a first, but adequate words is really where I'm struggling. It's this bandwidth of public discourse, this particularly rare and wonderful and unfamiliar arena, that wedge of civic speaking that doesn't allow for much rehearsal, frankly, for which most of us have little personal antecedent, especially not solo for me. The last time I participated in something like this, I won from my law school alma mater the, quote, Woman of the Year with Peter Goldman Award. And I think they threw in Patty Goldman from Earth Justice too, so I could do nothing. Let me just get this out of the way. I couldn't do this work. I couldn't show up in this community the way that I've been able to do since 1988, really, without Peter. Crazy. He's a crazy, optimistic, unreasonably generous, passionate, relentless warrior. This platform has given my life and the life of our children huge, deep meaning. And as they say, and as he always says, environmentalists may be a pain in the neck, and he can be sometimes, but they make spectacular ancestors and wonderful husbands. So thank you, dear. And I know that in normal and polite company, naming names is bad form. It's brash, it's brazen, it's sort of self-important. You risk leaving someone out or putting the wrong person in. And I have a breadth more than the length of a Golden Globe acceptance speech left to me. So let me hold up two people who have populated my adult life. Contemporaries to each other who I don't believe ever met, but who radically, in different ways, have shaped the life of this Nordhoff winter. Two who embody, I think, the ethic of CityClub. In John Marsloff and Tony Angel's new book, In the Company of Crows and Ravens, it's posited that the ability to transmit culture through social learning equips social species, like humans, with a dual inheritance system. Obtaining physical traits, action, and behaviors from the arrangement of nucleic acids on our chromosomes, that is, through inheritance of genes from our parents. And as I've said, I know I'm down to the time it takes to walk up on the stage from the audience without tripping on my dress. So I can't really wax on too long about my beloved parents, who girded me inter alia with a set of solid-state optimistic double helixes. But we also inherit a vast array of cultural traits from our society through social learning. And the first in class in the social learning teacher category is one of the founders of CityClub, who, when asked what they could give to her to thank her for her years of work and support, was told, quite frankly, dropping her glasses onto the chain, well, I certainly don't want anything you can hand me. And so the Nancy Nordhoff Award was created in her honor. Nancy, Northwest Social Register, Mount Holyoke meets radical nonprofit founder, nail pounder, political rabble-rouser, baseball maniac, slot machine fanatic, who broke out of the shadow of the family men when she and her sister simply thought that they should. In an era when women worked the community without any accolade. An unintended pioneer, a confident but assiduously not the center of attention trailblazer, who with a small brigade of women founded CityClub, since they knew that the city needed a more egalitarian place for civic engagement in an era when they were too old for Junior League or too female for the Rainier Club or Rotary. Finding themselves with a dearth of co-ed civic organizations in their community while deeply understanding the sting of exclusion. Their remedy, a CityClub with membership for all. Nancy's seminal achievement beyond loving her family, which is her first, is Hedgebrook, which I'm sure most of you know is a writer's retreat on Whidbey Island. This Nancy understands, and I share this conviction with her, that we are a narrative species, as Roger Rosenblatt some years wrote in an essay about this distinguishing human requirement. What uniquely binds us is our ability, and some would say our need to communicate, to tell our story, our stories. He suggested that the test of our evolution may lie in getting our story right, coupled with our ability to deeply listen. Nancy wanted to give women a voice. She started it. She lived on the property in a teepee. She reinvigorated the soil. She's a master gardener, among many things, and built something entirely from scratch, as Grace, her daughter, says, venerating the ancient while creating the new. And she's done that being a quiet giant whose shoulders I hardly sit on, rather whose feet I'm running around under trying to emulate. A master who for 60 years acted out of duty to begin with, but then resoundingly out of faith, belief, and hope. Thank you, Nancy, for taking an outsider, someone who didn't know a Skinner from a Bullet, from a Packard, from a Denny, under your soft, downy wing. And thank you for your partnership, mentorship, and great humor. Thank you. And if I may, I want to talk about the other person, who, a fellow traveler who I had the great privilege to have worked side by side with for the better part of what I'd call a short decade. And I'll just close with most of the remarks I wrote on the occasion of his death last month, as I think his life modeled this institution's mission. Some of you may have already read this, so you'll pardon me if I reread it, but I don't want to let go of this guy. Quote, "I don't believe in magic," Billy once said. "I believe in the sun and the stars and the water and the tides and the flood and the owls, the hawks flying, the rivers running, the wind talking. They're measurements. They tell us how healthy things are, how healthy we are, because we and they are the same." So said the legendary tribal elder, the moral lodestar, an unflinching advocate for tribal sovereignty movement nationally, an Albert Schweitzer Humanitarian Prize winner, the chair of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission, uncle to thousands, and a founding Leadership Council member of the Puget Sound Partnership, Billy Frank Jr., who passed away at the beginning of May at the age of 83. He was on that day, as most days, on his way to a meeting about fish and tribal treaty rights. For many, it can take a lifetime to know what you mean and to convey it unambiguously, to have your first and essential audience, your people, understand the meaning of the lesson, the life lesson. But not so for Billy. His demonstrable kinship with the natural world is a phenomenon he didn't work at, but it was something that was imprinted on his character prehistorically, long before the battles at Frank's Landing or the triumph of the Bolt decision or the wonders of bringing children into the world. It is this hereditary kinship with nature and his ancient heritage that kept him vigilantly at his work until the day he died. Sometimes a person and their story, their history, can suffice for a family or a generation or an entire people, emblematically for a way of life, a struggle. For the tribal people of the state of Washington, and indeed nationally, Billy's is the culmination of an era in this specific place on Earth, the Salish Sea, specifically Frank's Landing on the banks of the Nisqually River, and a time in our state's history, its aggressive adolescence, to paraphrase Tim Egan, when Native peoples' access to their treaty-given rights were circumscribed by a lack of understanding, clashing cultures, and virulent racism. What was it in Billy's cultural and inherited DNA passed to him from his father, Willie Frank Sr., and generations of tribal elders before him that created this deeply decent partner, both a proud bearer of Indian tradition and a willing translator across cultures? Billy was a fearless advocate for what was good for his people's interest and the planet's interest, which in the end he argued was good for the greatest public interest, out 7 generations. Working unsentimentally but with great humanity, humility, and without rancor, Billy Frank was a rare leader, more quiet than brash, more discreet than shrill, more serious than trivial, but relentless, who worked at the intersection of one of the nation's seminal civil rights battles and beyond as warrior, peacemaker, consensus builder, and finally, visionary. Billy was a long-term optimistic thinker and strategist. He was the personification of what it means to be courageous, not brave. Bravery is temporary. It's a rising to an occasion not necessarily of one's making. It's a kind of daring but not enduring. Courage, on the other hand, is a disposition. It's a quality of character. It endures. And central to that word is the word cœur, meaning heart. Heart was Billy's defining feature. He knew no stranger and was alien to no injustice. The Thursday before he died at a Salish Sea tribal dinner, Billy assured us he would be here for at least another decade. He had so much work to do. He mentioned that his father lived to be 104 and his mother 96, and he hoped to split the difference. He was on fire that night. He was naming names, calling us all to the cause, to come together. He was as powerful that night as anyone had ever seen him. And after his talk, he was blanketed in thanks. And at the end of the dancing, a shaman from Greenland chanted a hair-raisingly powerful and hauntingly beautiful prayer. And then, unsuspectedly, the healer briskly descended the stage stairs as the assemblage was settling to leave and singled out Billy, who stood up from the elders' table. Holding two gigantic wind drums, amplifying his immense tenor, he sang and chanted an unearthly closing prayer, practically cupping Billy's head in the drums. The room froze. Time froze. It blasted Billy, and it was clearly a benediction. It had to have been resonating in his ears even as he woke up several mornings later to go out on a typical Monday, to cajole, inspire, and hold accountable some agency or another. He got dressed after his shower and sat back down on his bed and didn't get up. His son Willie found him some moments later. The rhythm of the work that was so deeply imprinted on him that came to define him came to a halt unwillingly that morning, May 5th, 2014. Those of us who are lucky enough to have hitched our wagons to the audacity of his long view optimism and tenacity know that there's still much work to do. Let's help lay him to rest by getting back to work. And to the extent that we can get our work done in a way that respects one another, the rule of law, and nature's limits, we will be working together, all of us, on Billy's legacy. We owe it to Billy to come together to protect his people, all people, and the planet we all depend on. Thank you for this honor.
Sitting there listening to Karen and to Martha, I keep thinking what a profound joy and how important and inspiring it is to say thank you. Say thank you for your wisdom and your leadership and your example and for sharing it with us. Thank you so much. For much of the year, the conversation at Seattle City Club focuses on issues, policy, and politics. But today, we're focused on people, on Civic Trailblazers. So I'm going to tell you about City Club's work this year by highlighting 3 short stories about City Club's Trailblazers. Last fall, we hosted a candidate debate for Seattle School Board. Now, that in itself is not unusual. Incisive, whoops, got ahead of myself. Oh, there we go. Okay. Incisive, nonpartisan election forums are a City Club standard each primary and general election season. This debate, however, was groundbreaking for us. As part of our new youth civic education initiative, it was designed, run, and largely attended by community teens who, with City Club staff mentorship, hosted candidate preparation, developed debate questions, and acted as moderators and timekeepers. Carlos Martinez handled media for the debate. Already a bold civic activist, Carlos is one of our state's dreamers. He has visited both Olympia and Washington, D.C. to lobby for legislation enabling the children of undocumented residents to receive college financial aid. Carlos advised us that if we want to engage teens civically, we should help them find a relevant stake and personal stake for themselves and their families. Carlos already has a clear stake and deep personal commitment to civic advocacy, but City Club provided him 2 additional elements to amplify his civic power: connections to leaders and knowledge about the history and structure of his community. Following the city council debate, we invited Carlos to attend a forum where he was able to meet his Congresswoman, Susan Del Bene, and talk to her about immigration reform. And just recently, Carlos and his sister attended CityClub's Civic Boot Camp, where they put their own family experience into the larger context of how Seattle has been shaped through waves of immigration. Carlos learned about the demographic change happening in our global city, and he met a cohort of civic and government leaders who shared their own images and hopes in pursuit of the American dream. One of Carlos's peers working on the school board debate told us, at school, they don't tell us we can save the world. Seattle City Club is here to tell our kids that they can make a difference and help ensure that they have the confidence, skills, and clout, the knowledge, connection, and trust to do it. After all, there are Civic Trailblazers in training. In most venues across the United States, the conferring of a Jefferson Award, the National and Regional Nobel Prize for Public Service, is largely honorary. But given Seattle City Club's mission to improve civic health, we decided that recognition itself, while important, isn't sufficient for our state's Civic Trailblazers. As hosts of Washington State's Jefferson Awards, we committed to amplify our thanks and recognition with technical assistance to advance the skills and impact of our 5 state Jefferson Award winners. Flexing City Club's muscle as a regional convener, we rallied our network of corporate sponsors and community partners. United Way of King County stepped forward to provide volunteer management workshops. Microsoft offered to introduce the Jefferson Award winners to its powerful volunteer network. And Wimmer Solutions, a Seattle-based company providing businesses with top-level technical expertise, stepped forward with a generous package of customized design and development services. 2013 Jefferson Award winner Julia Sheridan has been an advocate on behalf of injured and disabled veterans for over 25 years, specifically veterans who've suffered military sexual trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and brain injury. Wimmer Solutions helped Julia launch a brand new website to support her work for OARS, Outreach and Resource Services for Women Veterans. All these technical assistance supports are completely changing the face and impact of our organization, Julia says. Our clients are busy, but now they can access us online 24/7 from anywhere. New people are calling every day for information and help. New donors are contributing through the website and because of the recognition we've received. City Club is proud of our role in telling the great civic stories of our state and convening the community, not only to thank Washington Civic Trailblazers, but also to help them magnify their power, impact, and reach. On April 7th, 2012, Nathan Friend and Leanne Doe committed to marry and build their life together in Seattle. They made that pledge at the Seattle waterfront, an iconic place, but also a place they knew would change over time. The waterfront seemed an apt metaphor for the constancy and also the dynamism of marriage. It will track our story, and we're going to track its history, they said. So 15 months later, when Seattle City Club launched its first Civic Boot Camp focused on learning about the Seattle waterfront and its redevelopment as a means to teach the pragmatics of civic engagement, Nathan and Leanne were among the earliest subscribers. With a cohort of 25 peers, they met with leaders shaping the waterfront's redevelopment. They learned about historical and current tensions between tourism and residential use, freight mobility and pedestrian public safety, stewardship of Puget Sound, and commercial demands. They learned about how, when, and why public input matters and walked away with a personal plan for their own engagement and action. We love to explain how the seawall works and why it must be replaced. We're long-term ambassadors for the project in ways we weren't before, they claim. We're able to look 5 to 10 years down the road and keep our eyes on that goal. Just last month, the City Club launched a second Civic Boot Camp that was chronicled in the opening video today, this one exploring how immigration has and is shaping our community. We analyze challenges and opportunities for immigrants to realize their American dream in the Emerald City. We discuss the investments necessary to ensure that everyone is empowered and valued as a civic asset. Leanne is a first-generation American citizen. Nathan, third generation. Once again, they signed up for boot camp to boost their civic knowledge, connections, and engagement with their community. Civic Boost Camp itself is a new City Club program created in response to Seattle's rapid growth and demographic transformation. We don't take it for granted that newcomers feel invited and know how to plug in to Seattle's rich civic life. We've developed and are scaling this curriculum to provide a sense of belonging, build efficacy, trust, and skills for newcomers and the rising generation of our Civic Trailblazers. There are Civic Trailblazers on every block of our community. Seattle City Club is inventing new ways to empower, connect, and inspire them, to leverage the power and strength we have in each other as the engine of our prosperity, because this is our community. Thank you. It's now my pleasure to welcome C.R. Douglas to ask for your support. Political analyst for Q13 Fox News, C.R. is our long-term partner. You have seen him up here many times as the moderator of many of our programs, and he's also a true blue, delightful friend. And while he's making his way up to the podium, I also want to acknowledge longtime City Club major donor, Matt Clapp. You'll hear more about Matt's generosity with a match challenge today in just a few minutes. We are delighted that Matt is here with us today, and he has been here with us for most of our history, investing in our growth and organizational development. Please join me in giving him a warm round of applause.
It was over 15 years ago that I actually showed up at my first City Club event, and I wasn't even moderating it. Since that time, I have attended forums and certainly been a part of forums, and the difference between being down there and being up here is not as big as you think. As an audience member, I have certainly gained a lot of insight and understanding, but as moderator, I have gained those things as well. Every time I'm up on stage, I learn something just like you about the amazing people that come before this club and present and share their stories. I have gotten insight on something I didn't know before. I've often gained an appreciation for a person or problem I didn't understand. I often sat in awe, even up here, of a figure that was before us. I've been inspired to read more. I, like you, have learned about institutions in our community that I didn't know existed. I've learned how to vote on some things because of a City Club event. I have learned what candidates I don't like because of a City Club event. And of course, I've made a lot of friends, and many of you in this room could certainly cite a list like that. There's this voters pamphlet we see every year. Sometimes you haven't had to read them because of a City Club forum. Think of the Seattle Times article you understood better because you went to a City Club program. That cocktail party where you were the smartest and most interesting person in the room because you went to City Club. That dinner party you were invited to because someone you met here, you maybe even found a date at City Club. A new job, some have found that by the people they've met here. City Club gets credit for all of that. It's the ultimate in continuing education. It has improved us all. It's given us all more community, more engagement, and more friends. And it has certainly improved Puget Sound and our region as well. When we have a better educated region, we make better collective decisions. When we have more public discussion, we have more accountable institutions. When we have a more connected community, we each have richer lives. And City Club, of course, fosters that all, and they make it look so easy. They keep the conversation going. They keep these programs coming. They keep all of you comfortable and refreshed. And that does take time. It takes effort. And yes, it takes a little money. City Club can continue to help you if you can continue to help City Club. That's the simple deal that has worked so well for so long here. So what do you give today? Well, $150 is a pretty good start. Why $150? Well, there are so many amazing things this organization can do. I mean, it is very creative with how it uses money. It is incredibly efficient. It is incredibly hardworking. $150 supports numerous City Club programs. It helps with education and outreach, and it saves a Metro bus route. Okay, it doesn't save a Metro bus route. But there's another reason for 150. It is such a nice round number. I mean, think about 150. If you divide it by 10, you get $15. And isn't $15 kind of the number of the era? $15. One minimum wage hour a month for 10 months gets you $150 for City Club. Or you could just phase that in immediately and give it right away. $150 now. And if you're a business, let's say you're over 500 people, how about really phase it in quickly? $1,500 now. Some of you come from employers who match contributions, but as you've heard, if you don't, there is this very, very generous leverage we're here to announce today that Diane talked about. Because of this wonderful patron, every new dollar furnished today will be matched. That means for every $2 a new contribution to City Club, another dollar is going to be contributed by Matthew Clapp Jr., so that magic 150 becomes $225. That's a real living wage. Without you doing anything, rather, the match happens. And again, a big shout out to Matthew Clapp Jr. for that great. And so here is my check for $150. The executive at Fox News will love to know that my salary is going to City Club. We have a number of wonderful captains today. Where is Dan Brady, the wonderful Dan Brady? Where are you, Dan? Yes, his table is great. Where is Liv Vivian, the Women's Funding Alliance? Where are you? There you are. Boeing, our great companies. Boeing. Yes. Russell Investments, Primera, Puget Sound Energy, our law firms, Lane Powell. Make these tables and the table captains proud. Perkins Coie, Davis Wright Tremaine, we have Stokes Lawrence, Schwab, Williamson and Wyatt. We have Silver Creek Capital, Switchpoint. Where's Group Health? Excellent Group Health. Earth Justice, Witter Trust. We have the Gates Foundation. And we have the Ruckelshaus Center. And let's not forget the wonderful institutions of higher education. Where is WSU? Very good. And UW are here somewhere, more than just David, right? There we go. Excellent. Make those table captains proud. We love all those companies and organizations for the great gifts they give to City Club every year. Some of you might have been there, but in December I moderated the Year in Review Forum. I started that program with a poem, and I end today with one as well. When City Club convenes, the audience gleans. The conversations are often provocative and usually make us more talkative. Every program leaves us a little better than before, keeping us piqued about wanting more. There's the Jefferson Awards, all the way to candidates for school boards, the Year in Review, the Legislative Preview, and of course the Civic Cocktail and the Best of the Campaign Trail. Aha moments from panelists who are sometimes opponents, always providing us with a civic lift. City Club today thanks you for your generous gift.
Thank you, CR. The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation makes grants to solve social and environmental problems at home and around the world. The foundation's programs have ambitious goals that include helping to reduce global poverty, limiting the risk of climate change, improving education, supporting vibrant performing arts, and advancing the field of philanthropy. President of the foundation, Larry Kramer, is here with us today to discuss a trailblazing national initiative to strengthen our democracy by alleviating political polarization. It's a daunting proposition, given the size of the problem, Larry says, yet it's the kind of challenge that the philanthropic sector is uniquely situated, indeed has a responsibility to address. Let's hear more. It's with great pleasure that I now invite Larry Kramer and David Domke, professor and chair of the University of Washington's Department of Communication, to join me on stage.
We okay here on the mic? So the mic's on? Well, Larry, I can't wait to see what you do. Martha started us off with a yodel, and CR gave us
You do not want to hear me sing.
and CR followed with a poem, and so we'll see. So let's start with polarization, and let's just define our terms here. My job here is to ask you some questions and kind of probe a little bit. So what do you mean by polarization? And then we'll turn to why you think it's a problem. But first, let's just define a term here.
Sure. Although before that, I do want to say congratulations to Martha.
Absolutely.
Thank you to all of you for having me. And I have to say, that was a really wonderful speech. It's really unusual to have somebody get an award and have their whole speech be essentially an introduction for other people who should be getting awards. It was really beautiful. Thank you. So, we have a kind of technical definition of polarization, which really has to do with voting patterns coming out of the legislature. But the core idea that we're getting at really is the diminution in the ability and willingness of people to compromise.
So unwillingness to compromise in the political public arena.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is a significant strain of thought in American politics that would suggest that compromise is a bad thing, that it's a significantly bad thing. It's such that a candidate in the Virginia 7th, just hypothetically, in the Virginia 7th Congressional District, who got 220,000 votes in 2012 to win his district, is the second-ranking member of the House of Representatives, gets beat in his own primary a week ago because he's seen as too compromising, which I'm not sure is the case, but is seen as too compromising. So please make the case for why it is that compromise should not be a dirty word in the public arena.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually want to make two separate points in connection to that. So one of them is, for all those who have opened it, there's the little Declaration of Independence at the table. And I was looking at it just before we got up here and thinking, but for the willingness to compromise, that would never have happened, right? I don't know how many of you have actually read histories, either of the Declaration or the Constitution. Neither of them would be there, but for the willingness of people to compromise. The core civic obligation and responsibility, particularly of governing officials in a large democracy in which people are going to have different interests, different beliefs, different passions, has to be the ability and willingness to compromise. Otherwise, you're dead out the door. So to me, that is exactly the problem, right? And it is a problem of leadership, which has conveyed this message out into the public. The other interesting thing about Eric Cantor's loss, which for us really goes to, is the tiny turnout in the primary that made that happen, right? So my guess is if you had voter turnout that was, instead of the 20% of the Republicans who came out, 40%, 50%, much less, something like you got in the general election, you probably would have gotten a different result. But you have completely unrepresentative turnouts in these key elections that really reduce the field to 2, and that's also a big part of the problem.
So what's driving polarization in the United States? Is this a top-down phenomenon of leadership at all kinds of levels, or is it a bottom-up phenomenon of grassroots demanding, hey, we just see the world in ideologically different ways.
Yeah, you know, like all problems, it's a little bit of both, but this primarily, I think, is a top-down problem. And, you know, you can see that in the way in which polarization started in Congress and at the highest levels and has been spreading out and down. So it is still the worst in Congress. It's bad, but quite a little less bad at the state government levels. And it's only now really spreading into the population, which has been much less polarized, but with relentless messages coming out of political leadership that compromise is a bad idea. And just the extremism of the way in which people on both sides talk about the issues and about each other, that eventually begins to be taken up. Now, of course, they're responding to messages that are out there in the grassroots. And that's where, again, to me, what's interesting is so much from the bottom up is being driven by the extremes, right? Who show up, who turn out, who are the ones who vote in the primary elections and are the ones who make the campaign contributions. So in that sense, it's both. It starts with an unrepresentative part of the grassroots, affects the top, and then spreads back down.
Okay, so you were law school dean at Stanford for quite some time, and then eventually decided to make a move out of academia to head this foundation. What are you able to do in the position you have now that you felt I need to do I want to do this, I need to do this. This is what I can do this with this organization and not with this one.
Well, you know, there is, I mean, I'm going to make the joke and then explain why I don't actually think it's true, right? Which is there is the difference between asking for money and being able to give it out. And the reason that's not actually true, actually, I love asking for money. I really enjoyed that process, and that was a pretty good pitch, and you should all, in fact, give your $150. If I had known, I would have brought my checkbook. I will probably do a pledge, even though I'm not from Seattle. Now I have to. So, you know, as we were talking before, to me, the job of being a dean was essentially the job of facilitating other people's work. I mean, that is really what, you know, to facilitate teaching, research, learning by students. And the opportunity to do that in and through the foundation was really the opportunity to do it on a much broader scale with a much wider set of issues that we could deal with and a much broader toolkit, in effect. So really the resources of the foundation, we don't do anything directly there to help other organizations and other people who have ideas on how to address some of the really important problems. And for me, working on the democracy problem was fundamental to that in the true sense of the word. Most of the work that we want to do, most of the work that all of the big foundations are trying to do, depends, at least in part and often in large part, on being able to move public policy. And the traditional way in which you did that is you could produce evidence and models and best practices, and if they made sense, you could count on a rational political process to pick them up and work with them and use them and implement them. And of course, that just doesn't happen anymore. So for us, it means, our resources, we either have to spend a lot more to get a lot less done or not be able to get anything done. And for the public at large, of course, it's a disaster, which is what we're looking at all the time.
So what are the, you have 4 prongs to the polarization focus. Maybe you could just summarize those for us.
Yeah, we started with a really, broad conception of wanting to fix the democratic system, broadly understood. There are different problems, and people look at this in different ways, and they tend to be conflated. So, for instance, I think you need to think of distinctly problems of, say, participation, which is what a lot of the debate about voting rights is about, that not enough people are participating, that it's too difficult to participate. It is true, it is harder to vote in this country than in any other democracy in the world, pretty much, for all sorts of reasons, some good, some bad, and that's not even getting to the recent kinds of things that have been designed to make it more difficult. But it's a distinct problem from, say, what people refer to as the problem of corruption, which for the most part is the influence of money in politics, and then polarization is a distinct problem. And so we decided that we couldn't deal with all of those, and we would focus on polarization because it's the thing that's preventing our ability to do anything about the other problems as well as anything else. The other problems have been there from the beginning. They've always been there. What's changed over the last 30 years is really the growth of polarization within the government, and now, as I said, spreading down, that's making it impossible for government to do anything. So this is non-ideological. If you are a Democrat or a Republican or even a Libertarian, you have things you want government to do. If you're a Libertarian, you want it to do less. But you can't get it even to do that right now. You can't get any action in any direction out of government, and that's a problem. So we decided to focus on polarization. And then even more narrowly decided to focus on Congress because that is both the source of it, the worst instance, and the place from which it is spreading down from what we can do. So then the question is, okay, what can you do about political polarization in Congress? And so we're focusing on a couple of different areas where we think interventions can help. So one of them is the rules in Congress itself. There have been enormous changes in the way Congress operates internally that have exacerbated polarization, that have created opportunities, that have limited the ability of members to work across the aisle, and that have given, irresistible incentives to do things that make it worse within. So for instance, just a quick example, they used to do voice votes in the House on roll calls. Now they record them, which creates an incentive to call for votes on things where you can just get on paper the other guy, something you can use against them in the next election, and then you get into the tit for tat game, and suddenly you have everybody calling for votes on things just to create, bad campaign literature, and people stop getting along, and it makes it harder to work together, and so on. So there's all sorts of rules in Congress that we think can be worked on, and related to that is building relationships among the members of Congress. Now there's only so much we can do because, of course, the big change that has undermined that is none of them live there anymore. They don't bring their families there. They spend 50% of their time fundraising, so even when they're there, they don't have much time to do anything other than the basic things that they have to do and that they do within their own parties. So they don't know each other, they don't like each other, and even if you can create the conditions in which people can work together, it helps if they don't think, that they're demons. So those two pieces, that's one piece. A second piece is looking at campaigns and elections, the process by which we select candidates. And as I say, for us, I think the key point of intervention is the primary elections. It's gotten too little attention, and much of the attention it's gotten has been focused on things that don't make a difference. But the fact of the matter is as I say, through the primary election, you've gotten down to two people. And if the two people are being selected by a tiny, tiny little proportion of the electorate that tends to be at the ideological extremes, which is the case almost everywhere, then it almost doesn't matter the general election. And so, if you look at the convention system in some states, or even primaries with the turnout of 15% or less, so we want to see what we can do to increase voter turnout in primaries. And so it's not about things like top two or open primaries. They don't actually do very much, because what you need to do is increase the turnout. You need to get a larger proportion of the electorate actually involved in the selection of the candidates. Third area related to that is campaign finance. Here too, this is a really complicated topic. The evidence really is quite complicated in terms of what the effects of it are or are not, particularly focused on polarization. But we do think that some things can be done through disclosure, that may have some effect, that people might react badly if they knew where the money was coming from, and so that would give candidates less incentive to take it from outside strongly influenced ideological sources. Related to disclosure, we actually think it's important to strengthen the parties. So the parties are moderating forces in politics. It's the weakening of parties that really triggered the beginning of polarization. And because they always served as a moderating force, because they had to operate sort of across a big umbrella, and the people who ran the parties traditionally were interested, they had ideological proclivities, of course, but they were interested first and foremost in winning elections. And that actually produced a kind of moderation. And weakening the parties and creating what we refer to as candidate-centered elections has really freed this up and created the space for moving out. So if there are ways in which to give the parties a stronger role in campaign finance, we think that would be a good thing. And then the last piece for us is working on the elections themselves. So, this means everything from cleaning up the voter registration system to upgrading the election machinery and enhancing the integrity of the election process. The recent polls showed that something like 63% of the people in this country don't really believe their votes are being fairly counted. That's just not good for the system. And we view it as a kind of critical undergirding public confidence measure to just do what we can to help restore confidence in the actual elections themselves. So those are the four key areas for us.
Is there one in those in particular where you might share a specific initiative or thing or kind of thrust forward that you've done so far?
Well, so as you know, we're just getting started. One of the things we were talking before, have you all seen the Pew Research poll that came out on polarization? So we helped fund that. And for us, that was because we wanted to have a baseline sense of exactly where things stand on polarization. And if you haven't looked at it, I recommend it. It is not a pretty picture. Building around that, then we've started to do essentially experiments in different districts to see what kinds of things will increase voter turnout in primary elections, what kind of information can you provide, what kind of changes can you make within the system that will get more people voting. So we're going to use the 2014 election as a kind of experimental opportunity to do different things in different districts and see what happens. We're working with members of Congress and through the No Labels organization to try and develop a suite of proposals on rural reforms that could take place in Congress. We're exploring campaign finance. There's a lot of research gaps that still need to be filled. What I said to our board when we went and asked them to approve this initiative, and I believe this, which is probably why I said it, this is not fixing, it took 30, 40 years to get into this hole. We're not going to fix it in a short period of time. This is a 2 or 3 decade commitment on the part of the foundation. I couldn't ask the board to make a 2 or 3 decade commitment at this point. So what we asked them for was an initial 3-year period for us to lay the groundwork and create some confidence that it was possible to do something, which for us meant primarily filling in the research gaps so that we believe we have solutions to push that we think are plausible, because there is a lot of bad conventional wisdom out there about what's wrong and what needs to be done, where there's research suggesting that that's not a solution, but we don't have alternatives yet. Helping find and or build grantee organizations that can actually do the work effectively, and most importantly for us is bringing in other funders. Because there's, I could put the entire resources of the Hewlett Foundation into this and it's still not enough to make a dent. So we're going to really need a broad effort to work in some alignment on this to make anything happen.
On that latter point, other funders, other organizations, how have you found the philanthropic community responding to this initiative, and what are some of the bigger challenges for you?
Ooh, I love the philanthropic community. No, it is. It's filled with people, who are really dedicated and care and believe a lot in what they're doing, and who beat up themselves and get beaten up a lot. It's interesting, of course, maybe it's because we are technically unaccountable, so we never say much in defense, and we spend a lot of time doing self-criticism, which is useful, but I actually have found, on the one hand, it to be a really good community. At the same time, people tend to be doing what they're doing, and it is quite hard to get people to switch. So the best progress we've had in building this coalition has been with foundations and funders that would be new to the area, that haven't yet committed to things. Because what is really difficult in the philanthropic world is getting real collaboration and working together. People tend to be committed to their own processes. There's really dispersed decision-making within a foundation, so to get something done, you need the board, the CEO, the program director, and the program officer all to agree. They'll have slightly different incentives. If you're really doing something and you're a program officer and you're really committed to it, you don't want to change. You believe you're doing the right thing, and the CEO may come in and say, let's do something different, and then you're going to throw a whole bunch of information that he or she can't really fight with because they don't know as much as you about the details, at which point it becomes really difficult as a CEO to say, nonetheless, we're going to do it. And so there's a slew of things that make it really hard to get a lot of foundations working in alignment that way. But it's, I think it's doable. It just takes a lot of effort, patience, trust building, relationship building.
Has that been surprising?
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise to me. I mean, came out of the academic world, and it was easier to get cooperation with other law schools and other departments in the university, other law schools who were my competitors. Right? We're in a non-competitive industry. I'm not competing with any foundation for anything. So you'd think it would be easier. As I say, I just have found, partly culturally and partly because of the structure of it, it is harder, actually.
Okay. How are you finding political responses to this?
Well, the initial response from everybody is great, right? Everybody across the whole political spectrum, I think, recognizes that this is a problem. It gets a little more complicated as you start to, move into the weeds and talk about what it is that you want to do. And that's partly because there is actually great disagreement about why we need to do something. So just thinking about the left, as I say, there are foundations and funders and grantee organizations on the left that think this sounds great until you talk about it, and then they actually have much more specific goals, or for them, this is not about democracy itself as a value, but about democracy as a means to achieve a particular policy outcome or social justice outcome. And of course, from our perspective, as soon as you make it about that, the effort itself becomes yet one more source of polarization. because, of course, people on the right then react really negatively. Our outreach to the right has been interesting because there is really very little effort on this on the right so far, but we have found that when we used, let's just call them trusted intermediaries, people who the organizations and people on the conservative side that we were interested in talking to, when we were introduced by people they trusted, there's actually an enormous amount of room for cooperation and working together. And so it's complicated, harder on the left than I would have thought and easier on the right than I would have thought, but difficult on both sides in getting people really. And as I say, the real thing is, can you get people to think about this as a long-term rather than a short-term proposition, and as something where the things they care about will be achieved indirectly rather than directly, right? It's if you have faith in your ideas, if you believe you're right, then you shouldn't be afraid to have this worked out in a democratic process that's functioning. So let's get the process functioning, and then we'll fight about it. And as I say, getting people to that point turns out to be difficult.
What about the media? You have that little chuckle each time I ask
know.
you, okay?
It's like each of these are things like,
I know.
oh my God, yeah, I know, what a problem. Yeah. Well, no, because obviously we started with the media as one of our central areas that we wanted to focus on, and we haven't quite given it up yet.
Oh, you haven't quite given it up yet?
We haven't quite given it up
okay.
yet. And
That sounds like a report kind of language, okay?
Well, the problem is this. So the importance of the media is, I think, self-evident, right? It is the means by which the citizenry get their basic information about what government is doing. It's not from government, right? It comes through that filter for all of us. And of course, now the filter is a little different because it might be social media, it might be the candidates directly through Facebook or Twitter or something, but it's still, how many of you read legislation? Nobody. You get a report about legislation from somebody. So the media are critical from that perspective. And of course, this worked. The media had a really important role that worked tolerably well because, for most of, say, the 20th century, there were basically 3 newspapers and 3 TV stations, and they were all essentially centrist. They were maybe a little liberal in their leanings, but they worked really hard to be centrist. And in any event, everybody relied on them, and so we were all basically on the same page with respect to the factual stuff, even if we were then going to fight about how to interpret it or what to do about it. So what we've seen over the last 30 years is, as you all know, the fragmentation, polarization within the media, the emergence of both media that have explicit political agendas, whether it's talk radio or MSNBC or Fox, or in the blogosphere, much, much more blatant, without any standards or control for journalism and so on. So that you say, okay, well, we need to fix that. We're not going back to 3 newspapers and 3 TV stations, but we need to think of some way to replicate what that gave us. And the problem is we just can't think of how to do that. The market forces that are driving what's going on are so big and so unsettled, and what technology is doing remains so uncertain that we literally just don't know what to do about it. And so we've kind of put it on hold, and we'll continue to explore and think about it. But the scale of that is really a huge problem, and it is a real problem for the country and for democratic government everywhere. And you see this is not limited to the U.S., this problem, and its effects are not limited to the U.S.
Well, there is actually a deep parallel between the rise of cable television and the internet and the polarization that you're tracking in American politics. Cable television arrives in 1980 in the United States. CNN is created then. Fox is created in the 90s. And then the rise of the internet in the 90s and the 2000s, in which the ability to access ideologically compatible channels is now available to people in a way that it had not been in the United States unless you go back to the party press, all the way back to the 1830s and 40s. What drove us out of the party press era was the economic incentives of an objective press. There was money to be made. I don't think there's money to be made with an objective press today. The idea that's not where money in the media system is flowing. So we need to come up with other communication forums, it seems to me, that become every bit as much the filter, but aren't relying upon that kind of lowest common denominator advertising-driven press, because that doesn't really seem to work anymore. What do you think about that?
Well, as I say, if you've got ideas, let's talk offline separately, because yes, I mean, obviously, I think that has to be right. But as I say, finding the means that will work and compete, it's really the competition that's the problem. The means that can compete with the sort of entertainment media that are out there and that attract people is you know, a huge issue. I mean, I should say back in the 1790s and early 19th century when you had party press, the role of the press was significantly reduced. Politics was much more local. I mean, there were really big differences where it mattered less than it does today. And so, as I said, we're going to have to find some, and also, you know, one thing that is similar is the decrease in journalistic standards, because one of the things that came in with the rise of the objective media was also the creation of real journalistic standards. They don't apply to, you know, the blogosphere, which is the source of information for a lot of people, and they've diminished significantly among the political figures who are providing the information in the first place. It used to be you couldn't just flat out lie, you know, and if you did and you got caught, it was like a matter to be ashamed of, and that has literally changed over the last 10 years. I mean, it's an astonishing thing to think about. At the same time, I don't want to too tightly connect the media issue to the rise of polarization, only because the historical story that explains how polarization came about has a lot of causes, and it's way overdetermined. So that was certainly one. But, you know, so was, for instance, you know, what allowed us to get through this? Here's a terrible irony, right? What allowed us to get through, there was a lot of polarization after the Civil War, big surprise, and into the early 20th century. What really allowed us to get away with that was the Democratic coalition, in which the conservative South nonetheless voted with the Democrats. And it was the breakup of that, which starts with Nixon, right, and the wedge Southern strategy, where the conservatives flip, and now you no longer have a conservative wing in the Democratic Party, and as the Republican Party gets more conservative, they drive out the liberal wing of the Republican Party. So there's the kind of weird, horrible irony that, you know, what may have allowed us to govern to the extent that we did govern well through the 20th century was our willingness to allow the oppression of blacks in the South, right? And it was the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of '65 that created the opportunity for the Republicans to swoop in and flip the traditional Democratic South. I mean, what do you do about that, right? And so there's that story, there's the media story, there is demographic shifts that are taking place in where people are living, you know, and on and on. So it's overdetermined. The media are definitely a big part too. But as I say, we think of this as, if you think about it from that side, then it really isn't possible. So we're thinking about, okay, it's a fact, here we are. What can we do going forward, which is not, let's try and undo what's happened over the last 30 years, but what can we do going forward that might reduce some of the tensions or create space for those candidates, because there are still a lot of them, who want to compromise, and for those voters, because there's still the large majority of them who want to see compromise. Even the Pew poll shows a doubling in polarization, but it's still 70 to 80% of the people in this country who are not polarized and who really do share positions across party lines.
Well, the solution, in my view, seems to be other institutions that step into the void of an information arena in which you need arbiters and filters that have goals and incentives to bring people together in an open, respectful conversation. CityClub is an example of that. So too is a university. A university is that place. And those institutions, to me, in my view, need to step up in a new way, in a different way, and recognizing that our democracy depends upon them in a way that previously we hadn't given them that much kind of role in the broader society. So that's interests me that you left a university to invest in a philanthropic arena that you think this is the place it's going to happen.
Well, so first, from that perspective, of course, I left the university. We do a lot of support of universities, right? I mean,
sure.
So as I say, for me, it was the availability of tools that I could use to enhance that included but weren't limited to what goes on in a university. Because I do agree with that. But again, and civic institutions are really important, and we need more of them. I was at a meeting last week where the topic of conversation was the revitalization of Tocquevillian democracy, which was built on just that notion, lots and lots of local civic institutions. And you remember the original idea was, you know, when you think of yourself as having a single identity, then of course other people who have a different single identity, you're going to fight with them. Right? So the idea was that you'd all be involved in lots of institutions where you would be encountering people of different views in all sorts of different ways. And that is, you know, that's really the idea behind liberalism, right? I mean, liberalism in the traditional sense. And it works really well. When I think of my parents, when I grew up in Chicago, and they were members of the Democratic Party. We were in Cook County. They were members of the Democratic Party, and that meant something. They went to party meetings. My dad was a Shriner. I'm actually not 100% sure what a Shriner was, but it was some sort of club that meant a lot to him. They had mahjong clubs. They had a bowling, you know, and their lives consisted of that. It was built around those kinds of things, and work was only one piece of it. One of the things the 60s did, I've always thought that was really bad, was they essentially killed that way of approaching life. The churches limped through, and they've come back quite strong for one segment of the society. For the segment that I grew up in, nothing came back, so we all work too hard and basically have our jobs and our families, but not the kind of rich associational life that really existed through most of this country. So you can do a lot with that. I do agree, and it wouldn't be just universities, but any fora, including fora like this, that create opportunities for people of different views and from different places to meet and talk and get to know each other and see that they're not demons and so on is a good thing. It's still never going to be enough, right? Because there are still these structural pieces that are built in that we need to fix. So that's why I come back to, as long as you have a system of elections that rely on primaries with tiny little voter turnouts and candidates who can be financed by ideological extremists, you're not going to get that change. You don't have the space for it to take place. There has been a taste on the part of the public to see this change for a while, and it just keeps getting worse. And I think it's because of some of these structural pieces that also need to be addressed.
Okay. At this point, let's make the pivot around the corner from depression to hope, okay, in our conversation. And I give a lot of talks where I depress people, but you got to lead with hope, right? You got to give the people hope. Do you have any? Okay.
Yeah. Honestly, if I didn't, I wouldn't have made the job switch.
Okay.
So the bottom line for me is the vibrancy of the United States political system, or of the people of the United States, and this is not the first time this has happened. So the ability of that system to self-correct with the right kinds of, nothing self-corrects. It has always taken people out in the society doing the things that were necessary. But the ability to self-correct has been shown over and over and over again. So, the fundamental values, I think, remain. The fundamental vibrancy within the institutions remains. So it really is just a question of the right kind of nudging. That's the most we can. We're not going to actually fix this, right? Foundations, let's be serious. But we can participate along with a lot of other institutions in beginning to put the right kind of nudges in that create the opportunity for what really is latent in the American political system and polity to do the work.
What is something that anybody in this room could walk out of here with and say, okay, it's a piece of the nugget for me. I'm going to do that.
Well, so one, vote in your primary elections. I don't know, maybe you all do. I will tell you the truth. The reason I realized that was important is because I never voted in primary elections. I didn't. Life is short, It's like I voted in all the general elections, but like another day off work, oh my God, that was hard to do, and you could never find the polling place, and and so on and so on. I started doing it in California because they mail my ballot to my house. That's when I realized, of course, if you could just bring down the cost of voting, you can increase the voter turnout a lot. And so that's one. It's like actually get engaged and involved. But what always makes me a little nervous when people say, yeah, what we can do is we'll mobilize voters in primaries. Well, okay, the usual tactics for mobilizing voters are you either get them angry or you get them scared, and then they polarize. So that wouldn't really be helpful. So it's like, how do we get people engaged without either scaring them or making them all mad about everything that's happened? And so don't get mad, don't get scared, and just go participate. Get involved in your communities. What has happened. What's so interesting, I'll use the Tea Party as an example, but it's not just the Tea Party. There is the analogous version on the Democratic side. It just doesn't have a name. But what they did that was really kind of brilliant was, but long before they were the Tea Party, they were engaged and involved at the local level. Right? They were moving into school boards and water boards and all of the local institutions around, which then provided them with recruiting candidates, getting experience, and all of that. So it really does depend on the engagement and involvement of people at the local level who are not coming into it because they're angry or they're mad and want to do some extreme thing, or because they just hate the people who are currently in control. So it really is, in some sense, a message about, which I guess you all do because you're all here, being involved at the local level, but spreading that out and making that, broader, and in particular, beyond, states in the Pacific Northwest, is really what needs to happen.
And maybe wrap up with this. You live in a Bay Area that it seems culturally to have some similarities to Seattle in a variety of ways, has all kinds of parallels. What is something here in Seattle that we should be cognizant of as a place that prides itself on its civic engagement, supposedly, but yet struggles in being really feeling a connection. We're famously not as connected as well. We're nice, but we don't really know each other.
Wow, I don't know. I mean, I only come here every once in a while. I'm really not. It's not hard to give advice to that's.
But I'm suggesting it's not that dissimilar to the broader Bay Area.
Well, the Bay Area is like Mars in a lot of ways. Where I am, in particular. So I've actually moved around my whole adult life just because I couldn't keep a job. So I was at Chicago and I was at Michigan. I was at NYU. I lived abroad for a couple years. In some sense, what you say is actually true everywhere, right? People are ultimately just people, especially actually in the Bay Area where most people are transplanted from the East Coast anyway. So I don't know. I don't know that there's anything special to say other than, I mean, again, if you think about that, the last line of the Declaration that's there, right? The idea of mutually bonding ourselves to each other, that is the fundamental premise. I tell one last story. I don't know how much time. So I used to teach law classes, and in particular, I taught a course called Civil Procedure, and there's something called diversity jurisdiction, where if you're from different states and you sue each other, you get to go to a federal court. And it's always a puzzle to my students why we do that. And so I used to tell them a story. I don't know how many of you have ever read Ben Franklin's autobiography, but there's this wonderful, famous story in it, the Puffy Roll story, where he talks about he flees an apprenticeship in Boston and goes to Philadelphia. He doesn't like the apprenticeship, so he goes to Philadelphia. And he arrives, he smuggles himself aboard a boat, and he arrives, and he gets there in the morning, and he's hungry, and he's tired, and so he wants to go get something to eat. So he finds, some guy from whom he can buy bread, and they can't talk to each other because they have different words to describe the bread. And so he finally he just shows him his money, and he can't use the money because they're actually using different money. And finally they work out something, and the guy gives him these 3 puffy rolls, which he gives him all the money he has, and back in Boston, this would have gotten him like a little roll. He gets these 3 huge puffy rolls. Apparently they're each about like this. He puts one under each arm, and he's walking down the street munching the 3rd one and describing how everybody's looking at him like he's from Mars because he's wearing these funny clothes. And you get the strong sense through this of the way in which at the beginning of this country, these really were like foreign nations, right? It felt a lot like I felt the first time I traveled abroad. You don't quite know what to say. Language is different, money is different, clothes are different. And of course, what we have done in this country, what the founding generation did beyond all the political institutions was really this idea of forging an identity and making that fundamental to people so that there is a religion in America. It's a civil religion. It's the civic religion. It's the thing that we're all supposed to share within our differences. And that's what we need to come back to recalling in the strong way, and that's what tells you, say, whatever we disagree about, we're part of this one thing, and making this one thing work requires us to figure out how to work together and never to demonize the other guy. And that to me is what it's all about.